Thank you very much for waiting. We'd like to thank you very much for coming to today's symposium, the International Symposium on the Long-Term Impact of Climate Change on Global Food Supply and Demand and Food Security. For those of you participating via Zoom, we thank you for your participation as well. I will be serving as facilitator at today's event. My name is Yuko Mamiya. Today's symposium will be conducted with simultaneous interpretation in Japanese and English. If you would like to avail yourselves of this service, please use your receivers. Channel 1 is for Japanese. The lecture materials will be projected on the main screen and the sub-screen at the hall. The Japanese and English materials will be projected respectively, so please refer to the materials in the language of your choice. In addition, for those watching via Zoom, you can listen to the interpretation through the interpretation function. Documents will be shared from the main screen account, which is the one being projected on the main screen in the venue, and from the sub-screen account, which is the document being projected on the sub-screen. Please select the document and the language. So first, we would like to hear from Dr. Osamu Koyama, President of the Japan International Research Center, or JIRCAS for Agricultural Sciences. So over to you, Dr. Koyama.
Members here in the hall, those joining us online, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at the Symposium on Long-Term Food Supply and Demand Forecasting, Long-Term Impacts of Climate Change on Global Food Supply and Demand and Food Security. We don't have too much here, but in total 310 participants have registered, and I thank you all for joining us here and online. On behalf of the implementing organizations, JIRCAS, Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences, may I offer you my greetings. At this symposium, as part of the 3 years project study on prediction models for ultra-long-term global food supply demand forecasts initiated from fiscal 2022 by the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries MAFF, the study findings so far will be introduced, and the panel discussion will discuss the global food security. That is the objective of the symposium. It is a huge honor for us to have with us Dr. Seth Meyer, who holds the highly esteemed position of the Chief Economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who has traveled all the way from the U.S. I have known him for many years. And also from the U.S., Dr. Keith Wiebe, Senior Research Fellow of the International Food Policy Research Institute in Japan, much better known as IFPRI, the abbreviation of CGIAR Research Center located in the US. They have kindly come all the way to join our speeches and discussions. I express my deepest gratitude. As both of them are global leading experts on the issues of supply and demand projection of agricultural produce and food security, the participants today are blessed with an exceptional, precious opportunity this afternoon. I would also like to thank the speakers, Senior Research Fellow Dr. Iizuka, Senior Researcher Dr. Furuya, all the researchers engaged in this project, and expert members including Dr. Hasegawa Toshihiro, Executive Researcher of NARO, who will speak after myself, for their contribution over the 3 years so far. On the topic of long-term impacts of climate change on global food supply, demand, and food security, the topic itself, in fact, this theme is the very objective of the project. MAFF, our ministry, has announced an ultra-long-term food supply and demand predictions twice in the past, in 2012 and 2019, and this is the third time. The last two projections were produced by private sector think tanks, but this time the national research and development organizations of our country that already had past research achievements, which is the National Agriculture and Food Research Organization and the Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences, have been chosen to conduct this study. Using the 6th assessment report of the IPCC released in 2022, we are working on the food supply and demand projections up to 2060, which sounds like some time into the future. In addition to this project, the Policy Research Institute of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries produces long-term 10-year projections every year. It is a rolling 10-year, always 10 years from a given year, but it only looks into 10 years later, and this annual report does not explicitly mention or treat climate change or global warming in the model, although considerations are given. As you are all well aware, should I hold the microphone, I think? As you are all fully aware, climate change is already an urgent matter. This summer again, it was horribly scorching hot, and the United Nations Secretary General last year used the phrase that the era is, we are in the era of global boiling. The Secretary General has coined a new word, global boiling. In Japan last year, the quality of the rice crop was significantly poor. The rice looked a wrong color, and there was a big impact on the rice market. And in Spain and many other places across the world, we frequently hear news of extreme weather events. In terms of food security, starting with the conflict in Ukraine, the supply chain systems have been disrupted, prices have become extremely volatile, and day after day our population are becoming worried and anxious. Under this backdrop, I would like to explain why we are trying to project the supply and demand for 40 years into the future, and why the country of Japan, our country, should be engaged in this work. First of all, while there are many international organizations mainly working on the research and analysis of this kind of analysis, which requires a lot of human resources, working on the climate change and other global challenges, and IFPRI, of course, is working on related research analysis. But the reason why Japan ought to be engaged, and as is included in the objective of this project, Japan depends on other countries for over 60% of our food in calorific terms, and therefore having good knowledge of the global food situation is absolutely indispensable to ensure our own food security. I do not have to preach you. After all, when we think about a global challenge like ensuring food security, we simply cannot think only about our own country. Having said that, I would like to discuss Japan's position in this area. I want to tell you that Japan is able to contribute to the world in this area because in the area of food supply and demand analysis, Japan has indeed made a significant contribution to the world. I think we can be proud of this. It was triggered some time ago, back in 1973. If you recall 1973, you would be at a certain age, but after the oil crisis, there was the food crisis and the skyrocketing prices. The government developed a large-scale global food model in earnest. This was the origin, which eventually led to other predictions. So later on, it led to the long-term predictions of food agriculture organizations. And I was also engaged in the FAO activities. And then today we will talk about impact model of IFPRI. And this is also a kind of a simplified model. And also the 10-year projection by the Policy Research Institute of MAFF and the model of JIRCAS, Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences. They are all coming from the original Japanese study. There is an annual unofficial get-together of predictors and modelers of international organizations and major producer countries called the World Outlook Conference, and there are discussions about different models and policies. And from Japan, we have JIRCAS and other related organizations. Japan has been represented from the inception. And the members are from major food producer countries, but Japan is a net importer, so Japan can provide a different perspective. So, is it possible at all to predict 40 years from now? So, if it is 40 years later, there could be disasters or anything could happen. And if you think about such a long-term future, does the calculation have any meaning at all? In order to explain about this, I have to first discuss about the terminology, the word of prediction. When we try to predict the future, we might use the word forecast in the English language, like for weather forecast. But the word we use for this kind of long-term food supply and demand analysis, it is like projection or outlook, and we use the English language projection. The word projection means to look into the future based on the past experience or past data, and by extending it into the future based on certain assumptions, we try to project into the future. If I dare to be extreme, in the case of forecast, of course, we hope and expect that forecast would be correct, because if the weather forecast is wrong, we might experience trouble. But in the case of projections, it's not correct or wrong, but it is showing a likely outcome into the future. So I might sound extreme, but if the projections are not favorable or desirable, then it's better if they are wrong, because if the projection says food crisis occurring, we don't want that to happen. It's better that the projection is wrong, incorrect. So that is what we mean when we talk about projection. Sometimes it serves as a warning, sometimes it serves us as goals or targets. So we have calculated numbers for 2060. So the projections tells us that if business as usual is continued, the future will be like this. And therefore, if the outcome sounds undesirable, we can take better policies or change our actions and behaviors to change the direction. So projections will serve as guidances. What is particularly important is technological development. We are working on technological development. In the case of developing technologies, long term is required, like developing new varieties of crops, and many other development are required. And then 10 years, 15 years, 20 years into the future, that kind of long-term perspective is required, and therefore such analysis is very important for long-term technological development. However, number alone is not important. What do we need in addition to the number? There are assumptions that come together with the numbers, and therefore persons working on the model, they will have to present the assumptions, the structures of the models. These always have to be made transparent. For example, to reflect climate change by measures against climate change, depending on the policies related to climate change, what would happen to the supply and demand of the food. So such assumptions will have to be made very clear. Another message from myself is about supply and demand. There is limitations to supply and demand analysis. The demand, or the amount of consumption that is calculated by our analytic model, is the demand as assessed by the market. So, how much a poor individual can buy at the market? In the case of Japan, food waste or food loss are the challenges that we want to eliminate, but it is about the amount, even if they might be disposed. Models can be improved, but at least we only get the aggregate of country-specific numbers, and it is only about the average that we can produce. So it is a different matter when it comes to the amount of food that an individual need to consume, and therefore the amount of food necessary to feed the people is different from what we calculate. If the number tells us that the food demand situation will improve on a global average, it would indicate that the overall direction is getting better, but it does not mean that the estimated more than 700 million persons suffering from malnutrition today will decrease. For example, there is disparity, the rich and the poor. The disparity might widen. There could be other unwanted impacts, and therefore the amount of food necessary and the demand, they are different amounts. In terms of demand, the so-called junk food or unhealthy food, even if that kind of food increase, that is not ideal. The quality of the available food also is important, but our model do not incorporate those aspects. If these perspectives are kept in mind, I do hope it will facilitate your understanding of today's discussions. We have had models in the past. We have now improved the model because of this project, and there is still further big room for improvement, but I'm sure this model will be a crucial asset for our population. Room for improvement, I said, and one possible improvement might be long-term projections. There could be structural changes. For example, the food consumption pattern might change, the people's behavior might change, or a brand new agricultural technology might emerge. So such major structural changes is difficult to be reflected in our model, and therefore the future challenge might be how to incorporate such structural changes. That, I think, would be one possible important area of improvement. Personally, for more than 30 years, almost 40 years, personally I have been working on the food supply demand and analysis myself, and therefore now that this model has been developed and that it will continue to be improved and that Japan will continue to leverage this model, I am really excited, and this is a special emotional moment for myself. Lastly, may I thank the Food Security Office, Policy Planning Division, Minister Secretariat of MAFF, and all the relevant persons who have planned this project to develop the analytic model, allotted the budget, and allowed National Agriculture and Food Research Organization and Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences to be implementing organizations. I thank you very much. It is my sincere hope that the model will be leveraged for many simulation analysis, because it doesn't work just by doing a single simulation. I hope it will be utilized for many simulations, be used to improve policies and for relevant technological development. And ultimately, it is my hope that the model will serve useful for the food security of not only Japan, but of the entire world. I hope that this will be an opportunity for all of us to think about the model and to think together about the food security. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koyama. Next, we have an opening address from Dr. Toshihiro Hasegawa, Executive Scientist at the National Agriculture and Food Research Organization, or NARO. Please take the floor, Dr. Hasegawa. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hasegawa, Executive Scientist at NARO. I'm honored to have been invited to speak at this important symposium. It's a great honor. At JIRCAS, of which I am a member, and also I was responsible for writing the IPC at NARO, rather. I'm a member of NARO, and I was also responsible for writing the food, fiber, and other ecosystems products of the Working Group 2 of the 6th assessment report of the IPCC. So from such a perspective, I'd like to talk about the significance of this project. IPCC, as you know, in 1988, it was established. It's a governmental organization. 195 regions and countries are participating, and IPCC looks at the most recent scientific grounds. In a 5 to 8 year cycle, they put out assessment reports. And the most recent report came out and was reported in 2021 to 2023, and that's the 6th assessment report. And the major message of this report is probably known to you. I'd like to mention a couple. The knowledge that was obtained through this report includes important thoughts such as that already climate is changing in all of the regions throughout the world, and the range and scope is very large. And as of 2021, after several decades, it's likely that 1.5 degrees would be exceeded. That is what they say. And within 10 years or so, although they say 10 years or so this year, we have seen a global warming exceeding 1.5, or it's being thought, it's certain that it'll go beyond 1.5. And another important message is that global warming is such that it's all attributable to human activity, and they categorically mention that. And going forward, such changes they forecast would increase. So regarding physical forecasts regarding climate, we were responsible for what impacts there would be and what adaptation, the impact and adaptation and vulnerability. We did assessment on these. The working group obtained the following main messages. It's related to the fact that there's a very much focus placed on risk. human social impact is having an impact on the ecosystem. This is one of the distinguishing features of this report. Climate-related disasters are on the increase, and the impact of the disaster is complex, and it's causing a chain reaction. And there are regional disparities because of this, especially those who are socially vulnerable are largely impacted. When the temperature exceeds 1.5, there'll be an increase in risk, and how that would increase is also mentioned in the report. Adaptation to respond to this is also progressing. That is certain, but there's a limit to adaptation. So with regard to adaptation and mitigation, it has to be quick and it has to be powerful. And that is another message of the report. Food-related points were highlighted. I'd like to specifically mention 3 of them. In the report, it was mentioned that in the past 50 years, the climate change itself has stagnated, has suppressed the growth of agriculture worldwide. And as is mentioned by the word agriculture production shock, because of extreme weather, several millions are thrown into acute food security, regionally food insecurity, and regionally, and depending on the social group, the impact differs. And this is the major message which comes out of the report. Climate change is such that it was said that it would impact largely food production, but that is not the only impact. Different impacts are being felt. For example, extreme weather, torrential rain, and drought. This impacts not only production, but labor productivity and logistics and prices, and access to food becomes difficult. Direct climate change produces not only physical impacts, pests and diseases, and depletion of water. These are manifesting themselves. In particular, in regions where agriculture is the economic base, there's a large impact, and regions that are dependent on imports feel the impact as well. And it's a major issue. In addition to this, economic and social uncertainty, geopolitical risks are also serious. Looking at the recent international situation, geopolitical tension causes confusion in trade and distribution, and it gives rise to rise in food prices. And economic insecurity is related to agricultural investment and introduction of technology and delay of these. And there's a risk on the balance on the earth. And all of these intertwine. And in order to ensure food security, comprehensive long-term perspectives are required. And this project is such that it enhances understanding regarding these risks, and based on scientific grounds, it supports policy decision-making, and we feel that the project is very important. The models obtained, model calculation results, and the findings of this project are such that the climate change and its impact on food production forecast is very much a beneficiary of this. However, modeling forecasts are such that there are certain assumptions related to this. The prediction forecast is not an absolute answer. It's just a possibility. It just indicates a possibility, as indicated by Dr. Koyama. And we need to be aware of this in leveraging predictions. And for this purpose, we should be focusing in the future, not only about predicting the future, but monitoring on a daily basis to continuously collect data on the facts and with regard to food, to have a good grasp of the flow and the stock. That is very important. And through this, we should build a system to support decision-making on the ground. And this time, we'll be discussing long-term predictions. But by combining this with monitoring sudden disasters, or if there's a sudden change on the market, we will be able to address and respond to this appropriately and quickly. Risk is becoming increasingly complex and uncertainty is rising. So a very flexible system becomes important in such a case. In realizing all of this, complex phenomenon, complex factors that should be explained well, or we should take a system type of thinking which clarifies this. In regions prone to climate change, or with economically vulnerable regions, we need to tie up with them, and also we need to tie up with those that are exporting food. A sustainable food production system is something that we should think about and we should implement. The results of this on the domestic scene, not only agriculture, there are related sectors. The food industry is such that it has a broad base. Now, the broad-based industry must be supported by the society as a whole, and that is very important. This project, in relation to such a system creation, we hope that this will trigger that, and we hope that there'll be further advancement and development. The outcome of this project for the future solution of problems will be an important guideline. And last but not least, to all those who are involved in this project, I'd like to express my deep gratitude, and I hope that such attempts will contribute to future food security and sustainable society. We hope that the contribution will be indeed very large. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much to Dr. Hasegawa.